He served in the Department of Justice for more than 2 decades before going on what he thought was a date with someone who turned out to be a right-wing operative, recording him making candid statements about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
And those files do exist.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of pages of files. They'll redact every Republican or conservative person in those files, leave all the liberal, democratic people in those files.
I think they visited that Maxwell person.
Yeah.
And also involved.
Got transferred to a minimum security prison too recently, which is against BOP policy because she's a convicted sex offender. They're offering her something to keep her on shut.
Here to discuss the case, a new lawsuit filed by former Justice Department employee Joseph Schnitt III is prominent national security lawyer Mark Zaid. Mark, thank you for joining us and happy Thanksgiving to you. For folks watching right now, click subscribe to Legal AF. And Mark, tell me a little bit about the case of your client. It was a big news story earlier this year when right-wing operative James O'Keefe released what was a furtively recorded video with your client. Take it from there.
Yes, thanks, Adam. Always a pleasure to be with you here, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone who's watching as well. So yeah, this made a lot of news when it happened. So look, I have been involved with trying to challenge James O'Keefe's operations, these undercover, really surreptitious, covert recordings of individuals targeted because of either who they are, of being Democrats or liberal or working for a company that just O'Keefe wants to potentially go after and embarrass. And it's often about embarrassment. And Joseph Schnitt, working for the Department of Justice, goes on 2 dates with Skylar, one of the operatives who's been used a number of times. Her true name is Dominique Phillips. She worked with Turning Point USA while she was in college for quite a while. Most of her online presence has now been scrubbed, but we have it from when it was first on. And as is the common topic nowadays, especially around Washington, D.C., that of Jeffrey Epstein. And that's what made the news, because when Skylar went on the date with Joseph, all she wanted to do is talk about Jeffrey Epstein and his confederate Maxwell. And Joseph said, look, I don't know anything about it from work. That's not what I do. All right, he managed, as you said, the witness security program. We know that from so many different movies about, right, taking the witnesses and the criminals and putting them in this program and giving them new identities, things like that. It has nothing to do with anything about Jeffrey Epstein. But anyone who watches the news, and especially people in D.C., we all have opinions about Jeffrey Epstein and what's going on with the controversy of releasing the files and why was the president fighting against it and, you know, all that good stuff. This was really in the news when the date took place over the summer of this particular year of 2025. So he said, look, I don't know anything about it from work. That's not what I do. But here's a bunch of my personal opinions. Little did he know, unfortunately, he was being recorded, and O'Keefe put those videos, or at least one of the videos, up online, and that led to him, Joseph, being fired from the Department of Justice by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General herself.
And the opinion that he expressed essentially was that this was amounting to something of a cover-up, that they would put the blame on some Democrats, correct?
Right. It was the usual I'll say talking points, but it was just the usual of what you would hear on not right-wing media. The concern that whatever would be released, and we'll see if this comes to fruition or not, whatever would be released would redact the Republican names and reveal the prominent Democrat names, of which we know there's both on both sides. You know, honestly, I have no idea if Joseph is Democrat, Republican, independent, political, or not. But what he was expressing was a very mainstream view and concern that, was even shared by many on the right who obviously have been accusing this administration of covering up something with respect to the Epstein fiasco scandal, demanding that the information be released in unredacted form. So it was pretty much a very mainstream view, but obviously it gets headlines when you've got someone from the Justice Department, just as an employee, who's making a comment that would embarrass the White House, I suppose, is the best way to say it.
And as it turns out, Trump did ultimately order an investigation into Democrats who he claimed to have been associated with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, that's right. That's the latest. Obviously, he also did sign the legislation to release the files, so we'll see what happens. But he has taken that next step to order an investigation that's now underway in, I believe, the Southern District of New York, if I recall, by the U.S. attorney there, who he appointed to look into whether or not there was any criminality, which, go for it. Many of us have been saying that for years. If there's anything associated with the Epstein case, both on the right or the left, let it be prosecuted. But the moral, of course, of this litigation is to make sure that just because you're a federal employee doesn't mean you lose your First Amendment rights. And you're allowed, while there is a line, I absolutely concede. I mean, I always represent federal employees and journalists, so I'm kind of going at it on both sides there. There is a line, but the line is that you can have personal opinions and express them in private capacities, in isolated events, right? You can talk to your family, you can talk to your friends, you can be in a bar and or restaurant and have a conversation with the expectation you're not being recorded and that it's not going to be posted online. And you can express views that maybe are critical of your own boss or your department or job. Again, there's a line, but in this case, we say that line wasn't even close to being crossed.
And of course, as you mentioned, at the time of this video recording, he was in charge of the Federal Witness Protection Program, not a program where he would have any kind of insider knowledge, but a really high-ranking level inside the Department of Justice.
Yeah, as I recall, I think he was a GS-15, which is a senior manager down beneath the political level. He's a careerist, as you noted, over 23 years in the federal government. And he had no policy decision-making authority. He was a manager of those programs. And of course, the witness security program and others within the division and office he was operating in didn't do anything, or at least he didn't, involving either Maxwell or Epstein. I mean, at any time.
I want to read something from the 23-page lawsuit that you filed that caught my eye. Of course, everyone who had been following this case saw that the Department of Justice tweeted out an email that he sent to his supervisor. I'm going to read part of it and put up on the screen. It says, "The comments I made were my own personal comments on what I learned in the media and not anything I've done or learned at work. What I've learned in your lawsuit," it goes on, and folks who are looking for the text message can find it, "is that he wasn't made aware that they were just going to tweet this out. And there's some federal laws concerning that." Can you go into that?
Right. I have seen, this is already one of several lawsuits that I have filed against this administration, because unlike the professionalism that we've seen in prior administrations, even the first Trump administration, but again, this is not a Republican or Democrat thing. This is a Trump thing, that those around him and work for him act incredibly unprofessional and immature, especially in their public relations responses. They are very aggressive. They are very demeaning. And what we often see is private communications internally are then posted online by the spokespeople from different agencies. In this case, Joseph was obviously, as soon as he learned, he was contacted by O'Keefe's people that there was going to be a story. So he immediately properly told his supervisor and was asked to obviously recount what happened. He didn't understand what the email was about because it talked about a journalist approaching him and asking him questions. He's like, I didn't talk to any journalist. And then he finally realized, oh my God, it was about this date that he had, which when she kept asking for more dates, and he's like, something's just off here. So he didn't do it. So he crafted an email, which he sent through official channels to his boss saying, look, I had nothing to do with the Epstein case. It was only my personal opinion on a private date. And, what do you want us to do? What do you want me to do? So that was what was asked, to craft this email. And then the Department of Justice literally tweeted out the email response. And then he was fired within like 24 hours, total surprise, under what is called the Article 2 authority of under the Constitution by the Attorney General, which we're challenging in other lawsuits too. This is nothing novel now by them. But to see an internal communication put out there so quickly by the department is highly irregular. So we're suing under the Privacy Act for that, as well as, more importantly, under what is the Fifth Amendment liberty interest of the U.S. Constitution, which essentially says, you can't defame someone and put them in a false light at the time, from the government perspective, at the time you are changing their status, meaning at the time you're firing them.
You mentioned that there are other lawsuits like this. I should mention Maureen Comey, the daughter of James Comey, is challenging her firing again under the Article 2 authority with no explanation here. Describe some of your other lawsuits. I know that you're representing some high-ranking, formerly high-ranking FBI officials and other former employees of the Department of Justice. What are those cases? What's their status?
So this first started probably back not too long after the administration took power. I'm trying to think of the earliest. I guess the earliest probably would have been the first week of the administration. For my cases, I think the earliest that I have was the chief financial officer of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has been effectively gutted by the administration. She was fired back in February under Article 2, ostensibly by the president. That's at least what she was told in the memo she received. And then others have been Department of Justice officials, lawyers predominantly, fired by the Attorney General, exercising the same authority. And then FBI officials, as you mentioned. I represent the former special agent in charge of the Las Vegas office in the same lawsuit as the former acting director of the Bureau, fired under Article 2 by Kash Patel, the FBI director. There are many others. We have countless cases at the Merit System Protection Board, as well as in federal court in different jurisdictions, and others, like you mentioned, Maureen Comey, filed up in New York. And these cases, while the president of the United States may or may not have Article 2 authority, that's obviously the key challenge. But then as it goes down lower, does a cabinet officer have that authority? Does the FBI director have that authority? There could be a determination that Trump does as president, but not the attorney general or an FBI director. Those are all legal issues not addressed before. I will say the Supreme Court is actually hearing oral arguments in December on a case that will relate to these issues. So sometime in 2026, we should have a better sense of how viable or not these cases are.
And it's a very important issue, especially inside the Department of Justice, to see what legal protections employees have to keep what remains of independence anywhere inside that agency. Thank you so much, Mark, for breaking it down. I'm looking forward to hearing updates in that case or your analysis of the Supreme Court case that you mentioned anytime. And happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving.
And for folks who want to see more of this reporting, visit www.allrisenews.com. That's www.allrisenews.com. And to catch the next video, click subscribe for free to Legal AF.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.